Good afternoon, and welcome to Keys to Creating a Robust, Enterprise-Wide Cybersecurity Culture, a health system CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Asimily and produced in partnership with HHS 405D. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments in the Q&A box, and we'll take those later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today. First, we're going to have our panel discussion featuring Erik Decker, AVP and CISO with Intermountain Healthcare, Julian Mihai, CISO at Penn Medicine and University of Pennsylvania Health System, and Shankar Somasundaram, founder and CEO with Asimily. And then we will have our audience Q&A. So let's jump right in. Erik, can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
You bet. So thanks, Anthony, and welcome everybody. Intermountain is an integrated delivery network that is headquartered in Salt Lake City in Utah. We have hospitals in 3 surrounding states, and in 3 days we'll have 6 surrounding states with the close of an upcoming merger with the Sisters of Charity in Leavenworth, or SCL Health. So we surround Utah, Nevada, Idaho, and soon Colorado, Kansas, and Montana, as well as having some clinics and others in Arizona, Wyoming, and so forth. So being an integrated delivery network, we also have a health plan. So Select Health is the plan side with 1 million members, 33 total hospitals as of April 1st. 60,000 caregivers or employees, and generally a large system in the Mountain States.
Very good, Erik. Thank you. Julian?
Well, hello, Anthony. My name is Julian Mihai. I'm the CISO at Penn Medicine. Penn Medicine is comprised of a health system associated with University of Pennsylvania, and we have 5 large hospitals in the Philadelphia area, and 1 in Princeton in New Jersey, and over 100 ambulatory sites of different sizes, as well as the medical school, the Paramount School of Medicine, that's involved in both education and research.
Very good, Julian. Thank you. Shankar?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm Shankar, co-CEO and founder of Asimily. The quick context, Asimily is a healthcare-focused, inventory, cybersecurity, and operational management solution for medical and IoT devices. We are working with, small, medium, large health systems, both across the country in US as well as internationally. And we started around 5 years ago, and we have worked and continue to grow with our customers and partners. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's jump right in. Erik, we're going to start with you. Define what we mean by a cybersecurity culture. How would you describe a good one and a bad one, and what do they consist of?
Yeah, so I think when we think of culture, we think of the behavioral norms that we have inside of our organizations, or even outside of our organizations. So, what are those non-dictated, non-policy, related behaviors and habits that the organization has? So from a cybersecurity culture, and sort of a definition around that is things that I would call the difference between awareness and being knowledgeable of the cyber issues, the people's place, your employees' place inside the organization as it relates to cyber, and understanding what their roles and responsibilities are there. And I think not trying to draw lines on what's good and bad. Maybe what I'll say is, elements that are of an effective and leaned in culture are going to be, those that your employees are engaging with your cybersecurity team on an on-demand basis. They're engaging with you versus the other way around, where you're engaging with them. That's a good sign. I would say as well, there's things that we do, where we do things like phishing simulations and so forth. And my personal belief is, those types of simulations are there to educate, and if you can even get to gamification, of them, where you make it more of a rewarding experience than a punitive experience. You can get folks that are more leaned into the issues at hand, and you can, leverage them as your human sensors. The old adage in New York City in the subway system, if you see something, say something. That's the same kind of thing that we want in a cyber aware organization, is our caregivers, our employees engaging with us when they see things that have gone awry. And that's because, we all know cybersecurity is not just tech. It's not just processes. There's a huge people element to this, and that people element is our culture.
Okay, can you give me any examples of employees engaging with the IS team? What
Sure.
what are some ways that manifests itself?
Yeah, I mean, very tactically, one of those ways could be if you have fish buttons in emails and people get strange email messages that they're not sure, is this legit or not legit, rather than deleting it, they're clicking that button and sending it on to the cyber team to evaluate. There's a lot of times that you get messages these days that might not even be like a phish, but could be a reconnaissance. It could be an individual testing our email accounts active, or they're testing and getting ready to launch into a business email compromise type of social engineering attack. And cyber teams don't necessarily know what is valid and not valid for every single message that flows in and out of the organization, but our people do. And so when they're engaged, they'll click that button and then send it on to you. There's ways you can even quantify that. So if you're looking at when you do your phishing simulations, hopefully, you're doing that on a periodic basis. I like monthly. One of the metrics that's good to capture are what percentage of your organization has actually caught the fish, and not only caught the fish, but sent it back. Is that 10%, 20%, 30%? That's a way of getting to a measurement of sort of engagement and awareness of one of those most critical areas that we want people to ask. Other ways that people can engage, I mean, that's just the fish, kind of context. I mean, we buy technology all the time in healthcare. There are leaders that are involved in the acquisition of new technologies, new service contracts, products, and so forth. Getting engaged in those up front so that you can design security in right out of the gate. You can evaluate those vendors right out of the gate. That's also a measurement of is the culture aware, is the culture engaged, is the culture leaned in, versus catching it constantly on the back end, on the flip side, and folks sort of thinking about you as an afterthought. That's another way.
Right. So you probably have policies where those have to hit security, purchases have to come to security, but you're saying those probably aren't always followed, and the more they are followed is a sign of a culture leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
The more I guess it's somewhere downstream that gets caught and has to be remediated, not so much leaning in there.
Yeah, and ideally you actually have institutional processes that support the whole policy, so that there really is only one gate, to bring all of that in, and cyber is part of that process. You're working with your supply chain and so forth. They've leaned in, they bought on it. That leadership has bought in on the fact that there's a second gate that has to go through with your cyber team to make sure they can evaluate the timing associated with those evaluations. There's always a desire to get these things done quickly, and there's always that friction of, oh well, cyber gets involved, we're going to slow the whole thing down. So an engaged culture is one that leans into that. Like, nope, we get it, we understand why. Please be as expeditious as possible, have, performance measures around it, demonstrate that back to the business. That's another example.
All right, very good. Julian, what are your thoughts?
Well, Anthony, I would agree with everything that Erik said. I think to add to that, culture to me means two core things. It's beliefs and behaviors. And I think one thing that's really important, and we hear it all the time in different ways, it's really about everyone's sense of responsibilities and taking it seriously. Being able to have an interest and stay educated, certainly with the materials and awareness campaign that a cybersecurity team puts forward. But also, as Erik said, leaning in, to me, providing just support for any initiatives that sometimes take time. And we know everyone is busy, but allocating a reasonable amount of time towards cybersecurity initiatives is another sign of a really good cyber-centric culture. And lastly, I'll add being vigilant and reporting. And to me, definitely relate to some of these examples already mentioned. I think to me, I find it really valuable when you see something really not rare, maybe that's not the word, something really suspicious about a system, and it makes its way to you. So that tells you that folks are engaged, they're keeping a lookout for something that's suspicious, that tools might not have caught it, and that's exactly what we want from our workforce.
Yeah, Julian, you mentioned the idea of taking time, and I think that's a really important point. I did an interview yesterday with a CISO, and we talked about tabletop exercises he was doing, and how he had so many C-suite, C-level individuals and very important people from the organization participating in this exercise that I'm sure took hours. And we talked about how they dedicated the necessary time to do that. And that it's very easy for someone to say, I don't have time for that. You know, I just can't do it, can't do it, can't do it. And if you can't get the necessary people involved for something like that, it's not going to be done right. So I just, any more on that point you made about people devoting time to this?
Yeah, I think it comes back to really driving the importance of cybersecurity and connecting, if you will, why it is important, and connecting that at different levels, so that when you make those requests of their times, be it executives or be it large groups in your organization, they already understand why it's important. They can relate emotionally to what they do and what they believe in, and then it's easy.
Yes, it is. But there's one more thought here, that once you get that buy-in, you made the case about how important it is, you get the cooperation. It's really important for the CISO, the security executive, to use that time extremely well, to be super organized and very efficient, and not have people sitting around waiting around. Because if they feel like you've wasted their time and that you didn't handle this properly, you're going to have a tough time getting them to cooperate next time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a key part where you need to follow through. And again, it depends on the groups you engage. You mentioned executives, and they are decision makers, so you need to put them in front of some decisions, not be bombarded with more information. Some other key groups in a health system could be nurses, which is kind of the largest group typically in most healthcare organizations. Or other clinicians. And in their case, they're busy looking for patients. So if you need something, you just better make it very crisp, very precise, very actionable, so they can help you without being taken away too much from their day-to-day.
Yeah,
Very,
I'll add to that,
yeah, go ahead.
Anthony. I think something that's very important for the evolution of the CISO role is we've moved beyond the days of being in the back end, you know, being in the back office, protecting the technology, you know, thinking about, you know, we have all these processes, configurations, whatever that happens inside of IT, and, you know, doing the work on the tech side to protect the organization. If the CISO or the security executive has that mindset, then they very likely won't be brought to the table, you know, at the leadership level, at the executive leadership level, because, you know, those are the nuts and bolts of IT. The CISO, you know, the maturity and the growth of this profession has and is a business leader, you know, first and foremost. Like, that's how we need to think of ourselves. And business leaders are, you know, solutioners. You know, we solve problems. We are enabling the organization to grow, to, you know, meet its mission and to meet its visions. And that has got to be at our forefront. You know, it's not so much about pounding our fists on the table and saying, you know, we need this because, as it is, how do we enable, how do we achieve the same ends, but do it in a secure way? Like that's got to be the mindset. And, the other executives will see that if you've leaned in that way, you'll get support. If you fall behind on this and lead from a place of no, and lead from a place of this is the control that says we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and you can't do it any other way, and there's not a good rationale or reason behind that is defensible in business terms, you're probably not going to have the support. So that's really where the profession has grown to. This is what we've asked for, and then this is our obligation now to be those executives that actually lead in that way.
Very good.
And-
Shankar, I want to bring
Yep.
you in here. You work with a lot of organizations, so you have that perspective of being in a number of health systems. You want to talk about what you see are some of the characteristics when you feel like there's a good culture, a cybersecurity culture. What are some of the common things that means to you that you're seeing?
Yeah, so I think it's a great point. And I think Erik and Julian have covered a lot of great points. One thing I will definitely add to it is the communication, right? I think when I've actually seen different organizations across the country, and people sometimes forget that there's a ton of different audiences within the same organization. There's the doctors, there's the nurses, like Julian mentioned. There's also some people who are on the IT side. There are people who are doing some general break fix kind of work, which is very important to keep the hospital running. And how you message to all these constituents becomes key, because each of them understands the problem very differently. And each of them sees the problem very differently. And so, for example, coincidentally, I have a lot of doctors who are friends across US in different hospitals across the country. And when I talk to them, I actually get a sense of the culture, because some of my friends, they actually tell me why cybersecurity is important. These are doctors. These are like specialists, they're cardiologists and neurologists. They are actually like doing the surgeries and things. And then there are some who tell me that the IT organization is a waste of time. The IS organization is wasting my time. And I can see the difference, because the way they have been communicated, they were said something in a technical jargon. They don't really get it. And they don't understand why we should even be cared, like they should even be worried about. Whereas some have been explained in a way which makes them understand that this is going to impact their work, right? And so I think I've seen the big difference in cultures. And Erik mentioned it, right? The processes, the people are a key component. That's finally what it comes to. And in the large organizations, the IT and the IS is really just a small subsegment of the organization. The people who really are driving a cybersecurity as everybody else, and how you message it, how you communicate it, how your people communicate it, and realizing the fact that people don't understand technology. They don't understand maybe the terms we use, easily in our forums. They don't quite get it. They don't understand the importance of it. That's been a very big difference to me. And that creates like this very, from the roots, it creates this movement in those organizations where people get it. They say things, they do things. They are able to communicate more effectively when they see things which are wrong. And I think Erik made a great point on how easy is it to communicate to the organization. That's the other big thing. I see a big difference. Even among the people who understand, I've seen some who said, I understand it, but I try to report it to my CISO or the IT organization. But God, the process is so complicated that it's so much documentation that I'm going to not do it, because I'm going to spend 1 hour documenting this problem. And I have 5 patients I can see in that. And then there are some who will say, it's just a click of a button, like Erik mentioned, or it's just a simple message I sent 2 minutes and someone took care of it. So one, I see a big difference in the awareness across organizations across the country. I see a big difference in the way the message is communicated, in the way people respond back, and the way the process is for people to communicate back to the authorities or to the people in charge. And so in addition to what Erik and Julian mentioned, I do see these big differences in healthcare organizations across, which I think make up for either a very strong culture that is sustainable, or things start falling apart because it's not going to work out.
Yeah, look, I would like to add as well. I mean, I think one of our jobs as CISOs is to find those areas of friction that actually are not worth it and get rid of it. So which is maybe a little counterintuitive, but our job is, we're risk managers at the end of the day. And we're looking at an understanding of, we understand the business side and the tech side and the cyber risk, associated to the whole thing. And when we come across a process that, organizations sort of get baked into doing these things for long periods of time, and you might ask the question, well, why are we doing this? And the answer is, well, history. okay, is that a real answer, or are we just, are we nervous, because of a risk appetite perspective to make a change, something could go wrong. Well, something can always go wrong. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, that stuff happens it can always, again, it's about risk, and it's about sort of managing in that way. So when you lean in and you find those processes that actually add friction to the business and don't provide the value, the cyber value that we intended to be, and you remove it, you actually gain a lot of credibility with the business when you're the one driving that. So that's some good advice that I would give folks. And as well, then when the time comes when you need to spend that political capital to add in a friction point, because it is serious, it could go off the rails. You've established that trust, already at Bear. You already have sort of the right tone, with your leaders and other peers, so that they know you're actually doing it for the right intentions. I mean, that's human nature at the end of the day. Like we work in trust models, and we have to be able to establish that.
Erik, you just blew my mind. I love the way you phrased that, adding in a friction point. And if we think of it that way, then we're very careful about doing it, right? If we say anything we ask our users to do, or clinicians, or anybody, anything we ask them to do that they're not doing now is a friction point. Is it worth it, right? And then taking it out. Very interesting. Anything come to mind when you talk about processes or friction points that could come out? Does any examples come to mind there?
Well, I'm hesitant to give examples inside my own organization for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I think I'm trying to figure out how to, maybe Julian, I don't know if you've got an example.
Julian?
There.
Yeah, I can
Get a rescue?
I can jump in. I think, look, I'll even give a simple example of the availability of single sign-on, right? So let's say you as a user could have 2750, however many passwords, right? So there's no way why you can't make that into a less friction way to do business. Save everybody's time, not have to remember passwords, and actually make it more secure for those that have seen clinical personnel with something around their neck and written passwords. That's not secure, right? So it helps serves both purposes, if you will. I think the other thing is, anytime you introduce a change, and that's maybe something that, for me, I've not always been in healthcare providers. I've been in insurance, technology industries before. And one thing that I noticed is that first time I came to the provider side is that I was thinking that everybody is a knowledge worker sitting at a computer. And that's not true, because the majority here are clinicians, and their job is to take care of the patient. So again, the appetite to do some of those processes, it's different for a person that's used to kind of walk through their email. That's their 9 to 5 primarily, versus somebody who needs to be in the real world taking care of the patient. So keeping that in mind, I think it's crucial. How do you introduce change and make it as simple as you can for somebody whose main job is not working the computer?
And I think it's just to add to that, like going to the point of friction, like I'll give you a simple example. Like I know there are some organizations where I have friends where they have said, when there is an incident, they need to fill out documentation, which is like 2 or 3 pages. Then they need to file it online. They need to go submit it to a department. And then they also need to enter it online, scan it and submit it. And then so that's a big friction point. I know why the organization does it. It's to create a very strong documentation trail. But the net effect of it is there is no documentation because nobody wants to do it. And so I think as CISOs and organizations, you got to think carefully about what is the balance between having a good process versus making it so hard to use that nobody is going to do it. So you pretty much get nothing. So I think I agree, like Erik and Julian's point. Got to understand the friction points and constantly weigh between what's going to work in an easy fashion versus just the friction is too high for it to just not happen.
I got another example for you. So now that I had a chance to think.
You owe Julian. Go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Julian. So, when you think about approvals of access into systems, who needs to sign off on that? That coming down to the real side of those sign-offs. Do you have 3, 4, 5 different approvals, going through the process because you just want to make sure every possible scenario has been accounted for, and you have yet a volume of hundreds or thousands of requests that are going through that? I mean, think of the operational impact that causes versus who's actually the one that needs to say, they're approved in. Users manager is usually the first one that is in the case. There might be a secondary approval because of sensitivity of certain data, where so-and-so is a data owner and they want to have sign-off authority rights on anybody that gets into a specific area of an environment. Okay, that's fine. But make sure that it's all being done in a rational, reasonable way, and you're not just throwing more and more folks in the midst of the approval chain just to cover literally any edge case that could possibly happen.
Right. Erik, so Shankar talked about the idea of keeping it simple, which we were just discussing. You mentioned the fish button if someone gets an email, and so I'm going through this scenario in my head of, okay, I get an email and it's questionable to me, so the fish button sends it off somewhere. It goes
Yep.
somewhere for review. So I'm sitting there. My concern would be, I want to make sure that this gets vetted and sent back to me pretty quickly, especially if it's approved, because if it's approved, that means this is legitimate business email. If it goes off into some void and I don't get it back for a week, and then I get it back and it says this is fine after a week, that may not work. So we have to make sure as we put these things in that those things don't happen. So your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back down to understanding, in my opinion, understanding what your service catalog is and service offerings inside that service catalog. And especially any point where you're engaging with a customer, and the customer could be an internal customer of an employee, could be a patient, or an external customer, member, or whomever. There should be expected norms and delivery on how quickly you're going to respond, and then those norms should be communicated out to the organization so that it's clear what the expectation is. And then you manage by expectation instead of managing by everybody's individual preference. I think that's also just a key to being seen again as, I think everybody understands resource constraint. There's always resource constraints. Even if you had literally everybody you'd ever asked for, you're going to have a resource constraint, so it's you have to manage, or by SLA, in my opinion. And so what's the turnaround time to, respond to that fish alert button, and what's that response going to be? How do you write a procedure around that so that the person on the other end understands exactly what's supposed to happen in that punch list? And then you're training, those folks in the back end so that if there's churn, attrition, or whomever, whatever happens inside your organization, it doesn't matter necessarily about the individual that's doing the work as it is about the process and procedure that's being expected there. So good organizations would have that response, in a defined timeline. It might not be immediate because there could be a deluge of all of this, but hopefully within a set period of time that the organization accepts.
Yeah, Anthony, I would add to that. You can actually have the opposite of effect if you put in place something like a fish button in this case, and you don't provide a response to the user for days on end. They don't know what happened. You could have one of the two responses. One, the person will stop submitting that, and you're going to lose that human element that is invaluable. And then the second thing that could happen is they will start sending emails to everyone they know, really impacting everyone's productivity. So again, not an optimal outcome as well. So really have to think through and have that customer mindset. And maybe I'll add one last thing on this topic. It's really about, because we're talking about culture, driving that if you will, customer service mindset, not just in IT, but in cybersecurity as well. We're all in service of others. And then when you're working in a shared services, sometimes that connection is not that clear. So as leaders, you have to constantly reiterate that to your staff and put mechanism in place to train that up.
Very good. Erik, I'm not familiar with the term service catalog. Can you tell me more about what exactly a service catalog is?
Yeah, it's actually born from, I'm going to use some acronyms now, unfortunately, ITIL, which is, like the IT standard processes and services. And so, adopting that into a cyber context is, think about what the totality of what your cyber program is, and I mean totality, 1 to N, N being the denominator of everything that you do. And in the numerator side of that, some of what you do is going to be customer facing and from a cyber perspective. So the phish simulations, the awareness and education, your access controls and measures, any governance work that is in place, third-party risk assessments, contract reviews, all of those things you're engaging with the business in some way. Some stuff is in the back end, your SOC, your security operations center, that's constantly looking at logs and looking for threats and events and incidents and taking action and response. Your architecture, your again, even on the identity and access management side, there could be back end, back office, engineering and architecture things that you're doing there to better enable the foundation of your access suite. But in all cases, everything I just enumerated could be a service offering in the context of a larger service catalog. So, and then cybersecurity is just one piece of the whole IT service catalog. So you call the help desk and you ask for a laptop, you want storage, you want to bring a new system on, you need a new server. These are all examples of services and service offerings. So the whole idea on this is if you can categorize everything into large buckets, so identity and access management is like one bucket of work, around getting identities in place and access, in place. You could have services underneath that define core things that the business understands. Shankar mentioned single sign-on, or maybe Julian mentioned single sign-on as an example, two-factor authentication, identity management and lifecycle management, the mover, joiner, lever, joiner, mover, lever, I got that backwards. All of those things. And then one level below that is that discrete offering.
Sort of gotten over as funniness, but when we were
I think we got some background noise.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, I didn't know if that was somebody interjecting.
Let me look into that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the idea on this is at the service offering level is that discrete unit that you're really going to engage on the customer with, or maybe it's an engagement that you're going to have with other members of IT, and you need like a review done in a certain period of time. Ultimately, you scope what that thing is. So an example would be an access request. What's the expected deliverable on an access request? Is it manually provisioned or automated, like an automated birthright? If it's automated, it'll be delivered in 24 hours. And, in this system with these particular rights and roles. And then when the access request is submitted into the system, it flows through and it's expected to be delivered within that 24-hour time frame. That's an example. Maybe it's a manual provision where it takes you 5 days to do that. And so for the manual side of that service offering, you would define it as the 5-day turnaround for these particular systems. The important part is to actually scope and define it so that people understand the context of what the work that's being done. And then again, you're setting expectations. I said it's going to take 5 days to deliver, a manual provision. If that's unacceptable, now we can have the other conversation, which is resources, time, and money. That's really the only thing that can change in all of this. Or maybe we can automate some of this, but that might, take an investment in capital to get some of that work done. And there's a return on investment for doing so. And so you can have that conversation. If you don't measure those things and you don't scope those things in that way, it's very difficult to explain what you do from a cyber perspective, which is one of the biggest challenges that we have.
Shankar, any thoughts there?
No, I think Erik covered it. I think just going back to this entire fundamental question, right? I think what you have to do in every organization will change from one organization to the other, right? Like Erik mentioned a few things that I think is important for what he's doing, what Julian is doing. Based on my experience across organizations, like every organization has a different problem potentially and where they need to improve their cybersecurity culture. So, you know, the ones who have a healthy culture, what I've seen is they encourage lively discussions to understand where the root cause of the problems lies. People bring out their problems, they express it, and then they can effectively address whether it's on the single sign-on or two-factor authentication. And the other thing is organizations which have an ability, which have a strong culture, have an ability to measure, implement, and also have a measurement cycle on how well things are working on each cycle, on each level. Like, you know, how well is the process working? How well is the feedback loop working? How well is the response time working? Like going back to the phishing button, how well is the response time working? Like in which sections is the response time working well, not working well? And they're continuously tweaking, whereas the ones who don't have that effectively have a process, they have set different levels, and then they are not able to adapt because I think things continue to evolve in the industry. New people come in, organizational processes change, people with different understandings come in. And so what you would do today might change a year later as a different technology comes in, as different set of people come in, might change 6 months down the line if a different CFO comes in or if a different CIO comes in. So things are continuously evolving. And I think the one thing I would add is the ability to measure and have those discussions with the organization is key. And then as you have those measurements and have those discussions, you continue to adapt and evolve. Even for processes that were working well, they might need an evolution over time. And I think that evolution is a continuous journey in the organization. So culture is not that you do it well and you keep it that way. You do it well and you evolve it as the organization evolves and as the landscape evolves. And I think that's the key point as well.
Great points. Julian, any thoughts?
No, I don't have anything to add, Anthony. I think Erik and Shankar covered the topic.
All right, very good. We're gonna jump to our my favorite section, which I want to get in here, our Ask a Co-Panelist section. I'm gonna give the panelists an opportunity to ask each other a question. Erik, I'd like to start with you. You have a question for either or both of your co-panelists.
Sure, Julian, I'm gonna go for you, my friend. So, so you've just recently started at UPenn Med. So what is your sort of way of engaging with the new leadership and sort of and establishing that trust? Like what's your first 100 days, 180 days look like?
Yeah, I think it starts with building a one-to-one relationship that cannot be understated. So I spent a lot of my first months ensuring that I've met with all the key leaders across business lines, folks that are leaders on the compliance side, and all the typical stakeholders. Having that strong relationship, it's key, whether you need to react to an incident, whether you need the support later on, and then really being a foundation to understand the specifics of the organization, if you will. And then from there, really, once you understand what they care about, you understand more about the culture, ensuring that when you bring back the strategic plans and roadmaps, you constantly go back and refer to what you've heard. I think that's a key element of showing that you listened and that you incorporated those needs and their thoughts into your go-forward plan. And that really makes getting the support that any leader needs in cybersecurity really key.
Shankar, do you have any thoughts on changing a culture? You know, Julian, new to an organization, fairly new, coming in to an organization, a health system. Any thoughts on how to improve a culture that may not be as good as you'd like it to be, or bring your changes to it?
Yeah, I think it does depend on what's not good. And I think it goes back to, so for example, I've seen some organizations where there's no awareness, where most people don't even know what the problem is. So I think if you're in that kind of organization where there is no awareness, but you have an executive buy-in, then obviously you focus on awareness training, and there are ways to actually bring that awareness training. There are some organizations where I've seen that the awareness is there, but there's no policies and procedures to actually make sure that, the entire thing is flowing. If you have that kind of problem, you would try and probably find a similar size organization, look at their best practices, try and incorporate some of that, pull in some of those policies and procedures. There are some organizations where all of those is there, but there is a shame culture, for example, and there is a culture where it's very hard, to get your voice out. And that's something that is fundamental. So you probably work with your HR organization to probably spread awareness and create easier, maybe the gamification that Erik spoke about, remove the shame culture. So I think when people talk about improving a culture, the culture has so many different elements to it that I think you got to first decide what is the problem. If you didn't have executive buy-in at the very top, then that is the first problem you got to say, because you are trying to fight the entire organization all by yourself. So whether it's an executive problem, whether it's an awareness problem, or whether it is like a communication problem, or whether it's a policies and procedures problem, what is the problem? And then depending on each one of them, you have a different set of resources you do, whether it's external or internal, or whether your own colleagues in the organization. It could be the chief HR officer, the CIO, the CFO. So I would say what you do in an organization depends on what the problem is, and each one of them has a different way to improve. And so you got to take it piece by piece and prioritize it and address it, is my thinking there.
All right, very good. Shankar, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Actually, I have questions for both Erik and Julian. So, I've been in cybersecurity long enough, and one of the things I've seen, especially in healthcare as well, is a lot more CISOs, in my experience, are being invited to board level discussions now as compared to, say, 5 years ago. That's what I've seen. 5 years ago or 7 years ago, when I used to talk to healthcare CISOs and directors, they would say, I've been told to do this. Now I think they have a chance to press and to influence the direction. So my question is, one, two parts of the question, both your experiences, do you see that evolution in your roles, in your organizations, your work across different organizations, where you're being invited at the executive level to present and influence? Because CISO is not just IT, I feel it's a business function. Do you see that happening? And two, going forward in the next 5 years, do you project that happening more, or is this just like a hype we are in, where this goes down and people suddenly start seeing the CISO again as an IT function? What do you see?
Well, I'll take the first stab. So the answer is yes and yes for that. And I think the reason why is a couple of fold. So first of all, understanding what the board is there to do is actually important. I think every CISO should have that critical understanding of the role of boards versus the role of management. At the end of the day, depending on if you're public, not public, that also some of that the fiduciary responsibility there changes. But at the end of the day, the board is there to represent the stakeholders and make sure that the management is operating along the lines of the expected norms that should be there. And cyber, the threats in cyber have changed over the last 5 years. I should say the impacts as we continue to move more digitally. There is just more and more catastrophic failures that can occur if we're not doing this job correctly. And those failures cascade into disruption of the business and disruption of, and in the healthcare space, it's patient safety, potentially as that of things that are at risk. And so boards manage risk, boards manage management. And their job is to make sure that we've got the right pathways in place, the right people in place, and the oversight is there. And they're not there to run the business. They're not there to make the decisions on operational choices. That's management's job to do that. So, first of all, understanding that is important, because when you're invited to speak and talk to the board, the context of what you're discussing needs to be in that lens, of why you're there. And as we continue to push digital, and again, we're talking healthcare right now, that we're talking directly patient safety and care for our people. and our patients. And so the uptime and operation of our clinical processes, our workflows, the volumes that we run through our technology are not volumes that can be run on paper. And so as we continue to be at that level and we continue to operate at that clip, the resiliency of those systems is actually more and more important. So what you're seeing is more awareness and more understanding of the patient impact, in addition to the data impact, the privacy and confidentiality impact, which is what our 10 years ago conversation was about. 10 years ago was data, privacy, don't lose the data, we'll have HIPAA breaches, regulatory breaches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now the game is different. The game is our business won't operate if this stuff isn't up and running. Our patients won't be cared for if this isn't up and running. So yeah, the boards are concerned about that for all the right reasons. And management is concerned about that because they understand risk and they understand why that is the case. This is why I say the CISO, the CISO as well has got to grow up from being that data focused, that data mindset, that IT, junkie, geek in the back corner. And I'm a geek. So like I say this, as a geek, it's no longer that job. Our job is resiliency to the business. It's the ability for the business to continue to operate in the digital capacity, and making sure that there's confidence in that ability to do it. And when things go awry, because they will go awry, there are always going to be problems, that we have solid responsive actions in order to deal with it in a quick way. If our world had no crime, we wouldn't have jobs. We wouldn't need to have jobs because everything would be perfect and that would be the case. But that's not the world we lived in. Ever since society has come together, there's always been crime. There's always been malfeasance. And we are just now in that land of cyber malfeasance. And so that's our job, is to be stewards and protectors of that.
Julian?
Yeah, I'll add to that. Ultimately, in my view, the core two things from a board perspective is to ensure that the organization is viable long term, right? So that means things such as focused on strategy and mission, and then a big part, of course, is the risk. So as long as cybersecurity is an existential risk and with potential impact to patients and significant impact to operations, it's going to be a topic of choice. I think the other thing is cybersecurity. It's a really new field. Now we think about, well, it's been 20 years, 25 years. Well, think about how many hundreds of years or more there's been finance and other organizations that got a chance to fine tune to a mode where, well, now every organization has its functions and it's kind of more standardized. So I think until we get there, it's going to be a constant change and a constant need for interaction and visibility.
Very good.
Thank you,
Julian,
Erik.
you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Yeah, a question for both as well. Both Erik, Shankar, both of you engage with different organizations and observe different cultures, either from a more vendor perspective or through your previous careers. I'm interested, especially as most or many cybersecurity professionals at all levels change jobs across industries. What are some of your observations that I think folks should be aware of? Those sometimes subtle differences in culture, even between the same type of organization, be it healthcare providers, there's sometimes large variations, and it's good for folks to have a keen eye on that. Any thoughts?
Shankar, you want to jump in first?
That's a great question, right? And I think it's a very important one. I think when I have seen in my experience, and I used to work at Symantec before, so I've interacted with hundreds of organizations across industries, including healthcare. And when I've seen people change jobs, one thing the first thing they look for, or when they notice for, is how does the rest of their peers think about them? Do they think of them first as a peer or somebody who's more like an IT worker? So for example, one of the CISOs said, I went to this interview and I spoke to, he spoke to the CTO or something, and he said, we are the executive team. You are here to execute and make sure we are doing. And he said, this is not the organization I'm going to go. You have to treat me as a peer. And, that's the thing. The other kind of organizational thing that people generally watch out for is there a general buy-in, and how much discussions have been there between the previous, because generally there would have been somebody managing that function. I mean, very rare for nobody to be in cybersecurity in an organization, zero resources. So how has that organization worked? How have they worked previously? How many discussions have they had? How engaged was the executive level? And some of it could be the person, some of it could be the culture of the organization. So how much was the executive buy-in already into that? That makes the life easier. The third thing is, what kind of expectations are there from that organization? So sometimes you want going into an organization to be realistic when people change jobs. I've heard people tell me I didn't take the job because they expect everything to be done and my budget was X. And they said in that budget, I probably got one thing done, and they expect everything to be done in 6 months. And they allocated my bonus associated to it. And I said, there is no way this is being set up for failure. Mm-hmm. So I think you got to also understand what kind of expectations and alignment, and make sure you are aligned. And this cannot happen after you join. You don't develop a 30, 60-day plan after you join, set the expectation. If you're going in as a senior level, you do it before and make sure it's all aligned, and that you have a general idea of expectations, even if not to the nitty-gritty. You at least know what is you're getting into and what the expectation and outlook is in 6 months. You don't want a shock or a surprise. So I think these are some things I've observed. And there are a few others, but I like Erik comment as well.
Yeah, maybe what I'll say to this is, as a CISO, so first of all, I mean, the job is in hot demand, and so there's a huge need for CISOs. There's a huge need for mentoring and bringing up new CISOs, that around talent that we see. And so hopefully everyone around us is looking and finding that talent and mentoring and coaching and culturing it, just because we need it, we need it as an industry, and thinking about it that way. When I interview, so I changed a year ago. I was at University of Chicago, and now I'm at Intermountain. I was with University of Chicago for 7 years, which is ancient history, a long time in CISO years.
Mm-hmm.
As a senior old timer at that point. There's certain things that I think you need to walk in when you're interviewing for these jobs. Like, what are the behaviors of an organization that are important to you? What are those, back to what Shankar was just talking about? What are the things that you want to make sure that you feel you're going to have success in, to be able to deliver and drive? Again, personally speaking, I do a lot of give back at the industry level. I do a lot of work with the federal government, with the 405D program and so forth. So the support of that is really crucial, for me personally. And so having organizations that not only see that as an asset, as a boon, but want to double down on it because they see just how important it is, for even outside of their own organization. Those are personal things. So when you can line that up, and you should be looking for that as they're interviewing you and you're interviewing, the organization, you should be looking for what those behaviors are, what those norms are, who makes decisions, how are decisions made, does that fit your model, your accepted practice? Some of us are totally fine with, huge collaboration, consensus building, decision making. Some of us are not, and so if you're going to walk into an organization that is consensus driven, and you need to get 80 out of 90 people agreeing, and then you're not that way, it's going to be hard. Let's just put it that way. Not that you're not going to be successful. It's going to be hard. And so you got to line up those behaviors well, to be successful.
All right. I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds for a lightning round of final thoughts. We're almost out of time. And I would like you to think about a CISO at an organization that does that. Maybe they'd grade their cybersecurity culture as C. Okay, so picture you talking to someone who's grading their culture a C and obviously wants to improve it. What's your best takeaway piece of advice for them? Julian?
If I'm to say one thing, I just say communicate at all levels to influence behavior. Think about what people care and think about what's the best channel to reach them through. And everything else will follow from there.
Very good. I'm sorry, Erik.
Put yourself in their shoes and ask the question, would you want to engage with you?
Ah,
You know, so are you leading? Are you at the table? Are you solving problems, or are you creating friction?
right. Are you creating needless friction points? Very good
Mhm.
point. Shankar, last word today will go to you.
Yeah. So I would say the thing I'd say is cybersecurity is not, culture is not one thing. It's a series of things that needs to happen. So figure out all the things that are required and prioritize, and then start taking action on what you see as the most critical, whether it's communication or executive buy-in. Don't try to bite the entire elephant at one go.
Excellent, excellent talk today, gentlemen. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming panels. With that, I want to thank our panel very much, Erik Decker, Julian Mihai, and Shankar Somasundaram. And I want to thank our sponsor, Asimily, very much for making this possible, and you for attending, and HHSD for HHS 405D for supporting and partnering on this event. With that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.